D&D is a beautiful and complex game that involves a lot of elements, a lot of character types, and a lot of adventure. And for someone who's never played it, it could seem pretty daunting to figure out if I were to be involved in a Dungeons and Dragons game, how would I think about making a character? And the way that I would recommend it personally is to think about what kinds of characters you think are awesome in fantasy stuff that you've already seen. Do you like Legolas and his type of combat, where he's a really strong archer, he chops stuff up, he's an elf so he lives a long time, he's very trained in different things because he's lived a long time, he has very high quality weapons and so forth? Do you want to be a wizard type of character that's casting magical spells, that's influencing people, that's creating illusions? What is your preferred engagement with reality? And with Dungeons and Dragons, you don't have to play yourself. You can be an imaginary character that you think would be badass and fun, and maybe expresses a part of yourself. Most of the characters that I've made in Dungeons and Dragons and in World of Warcraft and in other things represent something about my mind and what I think is really awesome about fantasy. So in the player's handbook here, it gives you a list of races that you can be, which is types of creatures like elves, dwarves, goblins, orcs, whatever. And then you've got different classes, which are how you fight. That would be wizard, barbarian, sorcerer, bard, things like this. So you can start with what's in D&D in the player's handbook and work from the established lore of these are the official classes that you can be, the official races that you can be, and you must pick one of these. But the thing that D&D has that Baldur's Gate 3 does not have is your ability to talk to your own dungeon master, the person who's leading the game. You can talk to them and say, hey, I know that orcs, it's only half orcs, are not in D&D as a playable race, but can I just be a full orc instead of a half orc? You could negotiate that with your dungeon master and make a character that isn't strictly in the rules. They call that homebrew, where you think of your own idea, and if it's cool and you can balance it, where it's not overpowered and you're not just gonna crush all the enemies because you're playing as a god character or something, as long as it fits and it makes for a balanced game, you can use your imagination. So we're streaming to Twitch right now. Is there anything that you think would be a cool race to play in a fantasy setting that maybe isn't one of the established ones in D&D and Baldur's Gate? I wanted to be a Kenku, and that's what I ended up being in a D&D campaign that I played in for the longest. Kenku are a bird type that are not in Baldur's Gate, and they're not actually, I think, listed in the player's handbook. They might be, but they're one of the lesser focused on races, but very cool. In chat, we have someone who wants to be a giant thief, a rat man. Our dungeon master and best friend is someone who really likes goblins. His brand on Twitch is he is the Goblin King. So that's one of the things he really likes. I basically make drow every time in Baldur's Gate 3, or tieflings. In World of Warcraft, I play as a tauren. So you could sort of ask to play a minotaur-like character. That would be another exception example where you're using your own imagination and you're not picking from one of the established recommended races in the D&D book. You're saying this entity is cool. Can I make a character of this? If your DM has the interest and the skills to do so, and they think it would be a fair fit for the party, there's not really a reason that you need to limit yourself just to what the established lore is. And that kind of connects with another thing, which is you might want to factor in party synergy for the class and the kind of impact that you would want to make in combat and in conversations. What would be other complementary classes to where you as a team can accomplish your objectives well and be effective? the classic party loadout of 4 players would be a melee frontliner. You could call it a warrior, a barbarian, a fighter. There are different archetypes of it, but it's basically a strong melee frontliner. And then you've got a wizard character of some kind, or a sorcerer, a backline caster. And then you've got a thief, which is someone who is high dexterity. And then oftentimes you will have a charisma character, one who handles the conversations and maybe buffs other people with stuff, and or they heal. So having that mixed party loadout of magical damage dealer, tough physical damage dealer, dexterous physical damage dealer that could be ranged or melee, and then a healer slash support class. You don't have to stick with that, but in so many D&D campaigns, and also in lots of stories and TV shows and so on, they use that standard party loadout because it kind of represents a lot of different elements, and it's well-rounded for handling different sorts of problems. You're not going to be super punished to any resistance to something with that party loadout. Every class has its own strengths and weaknesses. Certain classes are going to be really effective in situations. Other classes might not be able to do anything because there are entities that are resistant or immune to types of damage. If there's something that's like a ghosty spirit and it doesn't take physical damage, it's just immune to physical damage, then your wizard character would probably need to deal with that. Or your cleric slash healer could also deal with that with some kind of magic. So being able to communicate not just the kind of class that you want to be, but talking with your other people who are making characters and kind of planning for that is a really good step if you want to try to have a good party composition. Again, this is an imaginary game for fun, so you don't need to min-max things too much if you don't want to. Min-maxing is when you're just trying to get the statistically highest damage output or tankiness, and you're optimizing Dungeons & Dragons mathematically. You can also go at Dungeons & Dragons more thematically, where it's not about the combat and being as effective as you can and being sweaty in that sense. It's about the story and what you're choosing to do to shape the story. And that kind of depends on, again, your dungeon master and their style, and your group and their priorities, because certain people are going to prefer some things over the others. You could have a campaign that's very focused on combat and dice rolls, and you could have another one that's focused a lot more on lore and talking to NPCs. Your dungeon master is going to basically be acting out different NPC characters throughout the game. NPC is non-player character. So the DM thinks of this character, they think of a voice of this character, they think of a background of this character, and they have a personality of the character that they are expressing to you when you talk to them. And this takes a lot of effort, so you should be grateful to your DM whenever they're like acting out different characters. A DM does way more work in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign than the player, because they are God, they are the narrator, they are every character that you talk to, aside from each other, which is a lot of characters generally. And they're the one who has to imagine what happens whenever you roll the dice and something goes good or bad. They have to improv. So most of a D&D session from the DM is actually improv. There is a good deal of preparation where they have to set the location, they have to set the motive for why you're there. They have to basically give you a good reason to be in this world, make it seem important that you impact it in some way. They have to create some dramatic tension, and that can be purely of their own mind, or you can use pre-made campaigns. And this is something that you could look into yourself, even just for personal practice, is just maybe go with a pre-made campaign first and see how that plays out, where you don't really have to think of everything yourself. You can just read through and be like, okay, this is the background. I just tell the players this. These are the different situations where they have to make a decision. I can just read this to the players. That's way more simple and structured, and it also creates a tighter and more cohesive ending than someone who has to imagine everything themselves. So this game requires way more mental effort than most games of skill, and most tabletop games that you could think of. D&D is very, very improv based, but it doesn't need to be intimidating because you can always take your time with decisions. It's not one that's snappy like the competitive games that we play where you're in real time and you have to do the right thing right now. You're with your friends and you're with the dungeon master and you can ask questions. So when you get in a situation, you don't necessarily need to panic and be like, oh God, I need to do something about this. You can ask, hey, what would happen if I did this, or can I do this? Just communicating it to get clarification for the situation is a really important skill that kind of builds off of making your character and knowing what kind of character you want to be. We will go in here and look at just some of the different classes and the information about them just to get some quick samples of flavor for the Dungeons & Dragons world and the established lore. It's really cool, and this is one of the reasons why Baldur's Gate 3 is so good, is they are pulling directly from official lore. So as you study, these are the deities in BG3, these are the deities in the player handbook D&D. They're the same. They have changed some things. There are a lot of combat differences and mechanics differences in Baldur's Gate 3 and in Dungeons & Dragons, but the skeleton of the game is exactly the same. So that's really cool for being able to just learn the lore, learn who the gods and the goddesses are, learn who the different races are and what their backgrounds are, learning about sub-factions and stuff, and specific famous wizards. Like, all of that stuff is pulling established lore from something. So let's dive in here to the menu of Baldur's Gate. I'm not going to play the game here because the point here is to learn about making a character more so than playing the game. So we'll hit new game here. I always do honor mode. This doesn't matter. I'm talking about D&D right now, not Baldur's Gate. We just want to look at the classes and read some of the stuff and see the stats. Deciding your starting stats is something that is done partly by dice roll, but it's also something that you have a limited resource for. So you have to think smart about what stats do you want as a character. So let's look at the races here, just to kind of see some of the main ones. Again, like I said earlier, there are a whole bunch of races that are not listed here. It would take a lot of game development hours to put every single mentioned D&D race in the game, so they simply can't do that. They put a subset in of, these are the more populous ones, the more well-known ones, and more established ones, so they're in the game. So we'll start with these, just to kind of look at them and think about them. Elf, with the ethereal countenances and long lifespans, elves are at home with nature's power, flourishing in light and dark alike. I love elves. I loved elves in Tolkien stuff. Elves in D&D are fucking amazing and hot. Let's go. Elves are great. In society, elves are generally seen of as powerful and looked up to. They're also seen as snobby a lot of the time because many elves are very elitist. So they can be arrogant and condescending to people. So not a universally well-liked faction, but definitely one of the more lofty ones, at least in terms of nobility and establishment. Because they live so long, that gives them a lot of time to just get better at stuff and influence the world. Tieflings are humans with infernal or elves with infernal mixed in genetics. They are usually more judged as being evil characters and distrusted by the other races. So if you are a tiefling, you probably won't be treated as well as if you were an elf. But obviously other tieflings, those are your people. You have resistance to fire damage, which is really, really, really good. That's one of the best stats in the game. So fire is something that happens a lot, and being fire resistant is amazing. You could also think about what was the heritage that caused you to be a tiefling. Drow are the underground elves. So they're kind of blue-skinned. Their main society, they worship Lolth, the Spider Queen, who is an evil goddess. It's a pretty nasty, evil society. Slave ownership is common. a lot of infighting and killing between the noble family houses. And then one of the main differences between like human society traditionally and elf and other ones is drow specifically are matriarchal in nature, where women are actually the main citizen class and males are more limited in what they can do in society and how high up they can climb. So it's a bit of an inverse of the standard format, which that stands out a lot in this game. And just based on what other factions you run into, where you are seen as a higher status entity as a femme drow as opposed to as a male drow. So that's kind of a funny feature. And then there's also the split here of the subraces, Seldarine and Lulthsworn. So a Seldarine drow is more of the nicer ones who break away from Lulth the Spider Queen. They're more accepting of other races. They have their own deity, Elistrae, who kind of tries to encourage them resisting Lulth the Spider Queen and doing her bidding. So more ethically upright, more happy, more open. So I usually pick this one for when I make characters. We didn't see the elves, but they also have a subrace choice. You can be a high elf or a wood elf. Obviously the wood elves are more so in the woods. Humans, not too much to say here. You can be a human in the world if you want to. It is kind of fun to just insert yourself and imagine how you might interact in a world like this and you might survive. We can add some immersion. You could be a human. Githyanki, these ones have a relatively large part in Baldur's Gate in particular. I would think that they would be a pretty rare choice in many other D&D campaigns, but you can absolutely be a Githyanki. They are not from Earth, or this planet, whatever it's called, the Sword Coast, in the material plane. They're otherworldly, but they have a huge part in Baldur's Gate. Dwarves, they're pretty similar to Tolkien dwarves. They're sturdy, they're hardy, they see well in the dark. They're poison resistant. That's good. If you have anyone who really hates you and you're on the shit list, at least you can resist their poison. You've got gold dwarves, shield dwarves, and dwergar, which are kind of similar to like a more drow-like, a more on average evil society, underground. I guess all dwarves are mostly underground. Half elves, this would be half human, half elf. You can be a high half elf, a wood half elf, or a drow half elf. And it kind of goes as you would expect, where you get some of the benefits of human and some of the benefits of elf. Halfling, which are basically hobbits in Tolkien lore. Lightfoot halfling and a strong heart halfling. Then you've got gnomes here. Rock gnomes, forest gnomes, and deep gnomes. Deep gnomes, again, the blue tone, kind of similar to the dwergar and the drow. Dragonborn. These are heckin' awesome. Dragonborn, you have to choose which color dragon type you are. And the basic breakdown for what's normally good and what's normally evil is chromatic dragons, that is, colors, are evil, and metallic dragons are good. So if it's the name of a metal, they're normally good, either lawful good or chaotic good or whatever. And if it's a chromatic, they're mostly evil. Obviously, you could make an exception to this and be like, no, it's actually an evil dragon type, but I want to be a nice person. And it's like, okay, you could make that if you want to. That's your personal freedom. So blue would be evil. It gives you a breath of that type. So this is a lightning dragon type. And then you're also resistant to that type. They're so happy. Red, green, gold. There's pretty good lore about these in the monster manual. Just kind of the types of magic they use. Gold are fire, green are poison, red are fire, white are frost, silver are frost, copper are acid. I have made a silver dragonborn in a campaign with apoptosis in this game. I think we got to like level 7 or level 8. Bronze is lightning.
brass is fire, blue is lightning, and black is acid. Dragonborn, cool class, and then there is half orc. So you can think about what looks cool to you, what you think would be funny to play. Some people like to play a very funny character. Other people try to pick a very like epic and tough character. What do you want to be? What do you want to see in action? D&D has a lot of different options, and you don't necessarily need to be limited to these options or to the options in the player's handbook, amazing as it is. But I wish you the best of luck in your thought process. You get to choose different spells and bonuses as well based on your class. We can go over the classes here next. Barbarian, you don't use armor, but you're very tough. You take half damage to a lot of things. You're not a magical class at all. In fact, you can't use magic while you're raging. Rage is kind of like a mental state where you're just so heckin' pissed off that you have advantages in fights and you're resistant to damage. Bard is a very high charisma class. They're the musicians, the ones who entertain people. They make people feel good. They can also deceive people. They can also talk shit to people with vicious mockery and make fun of them in a way that causes them to be nervous and miss their next attacks. Bards can also get very mysterious magical spells, and their magic use is linked to their music. So to do a lot of their spells, they have to play some music or say some stuff. So it's something that is definitely a performance-oriented class. It's one of the strongest classes in the game as well. There are some subclasses of Bard that you get to choose later on. There's Lore Bard, Sword Bard, and I think there's... what's the other one? You get to choose these at level 3, which Bard school you are. Cleric is one of the support classes, but they can do really high damage as well if you want to play a more aggressive domain of it. Clerics also, this whole class shows you a lot more of the lore of the game, just because it shows you the deities and gives you a description of all of them, because you have to choose a deity as a cleric. A cleric is someone who is dedicated to a deity, and that's part of why they get power. So you have to choose who that deity is based on the list. You get to choose your domain here of what cleric you are. Life domain, this is basically healing stuff. Light domain, which is lighting up stuff. You can blind people with the light. Trickery domain, which is a sneaky cleric. Basically, you're a ninja cleric. Knowledge domain, languages and skills. You just know so much stuff. Nature domain. You're an avatar of nature. You're proficient in handling animals, nature, and survival. Tempest cleric is basically thunder stuff. This is a more aggressive type of cleric. You're blasting people with thunder and lightning. War domain. You're basically serving a deity that is more warlike in nature, or you're sworn to protect them in some way and you're activated in war mode. You could think about why this might be the case, and then you get to choose which deity you're worshipping and dedicated to. Seluna, we'll just kind of go through these really quick here. It's worth going through, I think, just because the gods are well established. This is the same lore as D&D. So if you learn it here in the BG3 menu, you also learn it in Dungeons & Dragons. Seluna, the Lady of Silver, presides over the moon, stars, and navigation. Her power over the heavens is constantly challenged by her sister Shar, who seeks to plunge the world into eternal shadow. So, Goddess of the Moon, and then because it mentioned Shar, let's just look at her next. Where's Shar? Oh, can you not be a cleric to Shar with this subclass? Let's see. Trickery domain. What is Shar? Am I blind, or can you not pick Shar? Okay, maybe you can't. Maybe you have to be a certain class. Huh. Let's see. Can Drow do that? Oh, you have to choose Lolth if you're Lolthsworn. That makes sense. Yeah, the options look different. Like it's missing some. Interesting. So at least in this game, it doesn't let you serve all of them depending on what race you pick. Cool. Okay, so we got Selûne. We'll just go through in order then. A Bahamut, Angel of the Seven Heavens, is the dragon of justice. His ideals of mercy and just authority keep him locked in an inexorable rivalry with his sister Tiamat. Okay, so Bahamut and Tiamat are dragons who have a rivalry. Tiamat, let's see what you got. The Many Maud is a roiling mass of avarice and hate, currently trapped within the Nine Hells. The dragon god of greed eternally plots her escape, as do her many fanatics in the world of Thorol. Or Toril, sorry. So these dragons be fighting. Tempest, the lord of battles, overseeing war and its soldiers. He is the embodiment of honorable combat and condemns needless bloodlust. War and soldiers, but honorably so. Pretty cool. So it's measured, but a combat god. Tyr, the blind god, rules over law and justice, encouraging valiant acts from his followers and relentlessly pursuing oathbreakers. Ooh. So very lawful good. Very lawful good. It's so funny that Lolthsworn have to choose Lolth. The much reviled matriarch of the Drow pantheon, Lolth holds sway over spiders, the Underdark, and the wicked creatures of demon web pits. Her primary goal is to corrupt all Drow, transforming them into heartless cultists. Wow, hardcore. Helm, the Watcher, is an eternal sentry among the gods, representing guardians across the plains. After more than a century of fading worship, Helm's power was restored at the Second Sundering. Okay. Watcher god, Helm. Ilmater, the crying god, protects the oppressed and persecuted. His clergy is sworn to alleviate suffering, even if that means taking on that pain personally. Cool, self-sacrificing kind of a god. Mystra, the mother of all magic, oversees the weave and spreads arcane knowledge to mortal spellcasters. Her clerics preserve ancient lore and protect bastions of magical energy. Ogma is the god of inspiration and invention, sharing knowledge with the world through his bards and clerics. Unlike many other deities, Ogma accepts all moral alignments into his clergy. Kelemvor guides the dead to their appropriate plane in the afterlife. His clergy provides the last rites across Faerun, but also destroy undead that have escaped Kelemvor's judgment. Faerun, I guess, is what you would call the lands of planet Earth, or this main place that we are. Moradin, the Allhammer, is a dwarven god worshipped by smiths, artisans, and miners alike. He and Laduger are constantly at odds. So gods like this, you can kind of think about situationally, as a race, would it make sense for you to worship this deity? You can think of something that's appropriate, or you could say that maybe you were a refugee and you went to a city and their religion made sense to you and you joined that. That's something that you can always imagine into the game and then talk to your DM and make that part of your backstory. That's totally valid. Corellon Larethian, creator of the elves, oversees the elven pantheon as a whole, providing blessings to those who study art, magic, and nature. Garl Glittergold, the watchful protector, is the king of gnomish gods, a deity of honor, gem-cutting, protection, and trickery. Yondala, the mother of the halfling pantheon, is known for her kindness and open mind, encouraging her followers to protect the home, the hearth, and nature. Lolth we've read. Grumsh is the One Eye, is the Orcs' patron deity, a god of war, conquest, and victory at all costs. He's held an ancient and immutable grudge against the elven pantheon since Corellon Larethian took his eye. Tiamat was the rival dragon. Elistrae is the goddess of good aligned drow, beauty, song, and freedom. The Dark Maiden desires balance between all races and struggles against her mother Lolth's corrupt aims. Lathlander, the Morning Lord, is the god of dawn and spring, birth and beginnings. He is invoked to christen both new ventures and new life. His followers embrace growth and renewal and despise the undead. Talos represents the uncaring and destructive force of nature. His followers see life as a set of random effects in a sea of chaos and take what they can, for who can say when Talos will strike next? Very chaotic. Timora is the bright-faced goddess of fortune who favors those who gamble and set out on adventure with the utmost skill and daring. So kind of a god of chance. Myliki is the goddess of forests and the creatures that live within them. She's a remote and spiritual deity often spoken of in the quietest of forests. So this is just an overview of some of the main established pantheon in D&D. If you're a cleric, this choice is absolutely necessary for you. If you are not a cleric, it might be fun to know some of this stuff. But this is just a nice menu where you can read about that. And then we can go through the different other decisions that you have as you're making your character. So you've got your race, which you looked at all of these. We can look at the rest of the classes here. We saw cleric, that's kind of the support class. You've got heals, you've got damage. You can be more aggressive or more defensive. Druid. So druids are very, very versatile. If you've played WoW, you kind of know that druids are the jack of all trades class. They can turn into a bear and be a tanky kind of character. They can turn into a cat and be a rogue-like character. They can heal other people. They can do nature damage to stuff. Druids have a lot of options. They might not be as like super proficient in any one thing as some of the more specialized classes, but they're very, very good at doing lots of different things well. They have a lot of tools, basically. And they're very nature-oriented. There are a few different subclasses of druid. I think, do you pick this at the start? No, I guess you choose your druid spec at level 3. So druids are a very cool class. Fighters, another physical damage focused class, kind of like barbarian. You can cast spells, but you usually don't get spells. One of the subclasses of fighter does get spells. That's Eldritch Knight. But the other classes, subclasses, champion and battlemaster, those ones you're completely focused on physical attacks. So just a really hard hitter. Two-handed weapons. You could also focus on archery as well as a fighter, but very just weapons and armor kind of situation. Monk, this class, initially when I was reading about it, it seemed confusing because they use their own unique resource called ki, but it's not very complicated when you actually get down to it. You basically have a certain amount of energy every day. This key number could be 4 at the start of the game, or it could be 8 as you level up more. But that's the amount of times that you can do special punches, is the way that you could make it simpler. You've got Flurry of Blows. Monks are very good at doing lots of stuff with their bonus action. So they're a very fast-moving class where you can often do multiple things every turn. I love playing Monk. It's got a few different subclasses. You can be a Shadow Monk, which is kind of a ninja monk. You can be a 4 elements one where you're shooting out fire and ice and other stuff, or you can be an open hand monk, which is more of like the melee combat specialist where you just slap the shit out of people really effectively. Paladin, they get their power from their oath, so whatever they swear to do, that sacred oath gives them power that they use magically and so on. You have to commit to your oath in D&D, and you have to behave in a manner that keeps it, because if you don't, you will lose your source of power and be disqualified from your power set, and you will turn into a different type of paladin called an Oathbreaker. So paladin is the only class of all of these that I know of where you have substantial consequences for your behavior, in a way that if you don't uphold your oath, your powers will change and you'll become a different kind of person. You can oftentimes do things to regain your oath, but unlike clerics, it's not about who you serve as a paladin, it's about what you swear to do. So as a paladin, I think it's really good to just decide that for yourself. If I'm making a paladin, what is my oath? What have I sworn to do and uphold? With this, the subclasses, it kind of shows you examples of oaths, which you could articulate into actual story reasons for your character. But the Oath of the Ancients is when you fight on the side of light in the cosmic struggle against darkness to preserve the sanctity of life and the beauty of nature. So this is a very nice, protective kind of paladin who wants to keep good creatures safe, vulnerable creatures safe, and to fight against evil. Oath of Devotion, the idea of a knight in shining armor. You act with honor and virtue to protect the weak and pursue the greater good. So another very positive kind of paladin where you're protecting the weak. And then Oath of Vengeance, you have set aside your own purity to right wrongs and deliver justice to those who have committed the most grievous sins. So this is more of the aggressive paladin type where you can take a much wider berth in killing people and not break your oath. These two oaths, if you're killing innocent people or even people who are kind of bad but not super bad, you can break your oath by doing so. And this is a mechanic that's in Baldur's Gate as well. You just suddenly feel different and then you can't use a bunch of your paladin spells, and that's because you killed people who you probably shouldn't have. Oath of Vengeance is more so making sure you kill the bad people, and if you kill some medium people or good people, you might not break your oath, because if your oath is to strike down all evil where you find it, you're not really that upset by striking down someone who probably didn't deserve it that much. But someone who's Oath of Devotion or Oath of the Ancients, that would make you feel really bad and you'd probably lose your Paladin Oath. The fourth kind of Paladin, which is what happens when you break your oath, is the Oath Breaker, where you have more of a dark power set, you're able to manipulate the undead, and you're just kind of... You're not held accountable to anything anymore. You can kill whoever you want and be as evil as you want, and those powers stay the same. So it's kind of where paladins will bottom out, ethically speaking, but those abilities are still strong. They're just different, and many people would consider them to be more ugly and necromancy-oriented in nature. So keep in mind, as a paladin, your behavior. For all characters that you make, all classes and stuff, you are held accountable to your alignment when you're playing this game. Your alignment can be good or evil, and it could be chaotic or it could be lawful. Those are kind of the axes that you work with normally. And you can state what these things are at the start of your campaign. Like, just tell your DM, I'm a chaotic good character, where I'm not afraid to break rules sometimes, but I usually try to do the right thing. Or you could be neutral, and you could be a monk who just wants to meditate, and they think that the world is a very silly place, and they're okay with just watching people trip over themselves. They're just very neutral about the drama and the affairs. Or you could be someone who very much wants to obey the law and make sure everyone else obeys the law. That would be a lawful character. And then an evil character usually has a goal in mind for something they want to obtain for themselves. Maybe you want power. Maybe you want money. Maybe you want influence over people. Maybe you want to take over some area. Like, evil characters usually have an objective, something they want really badly, and they're willing to make ethical compromises to get there. That's what makes them evil. Good characters have a set of ethical standards to uphold, where you want to make sure you're a certain level of good to other people so that you're not destroying the world and, like, darkening your own conscience. Moving forward through the classes here, we have Ranger, which shooting bows, befriending animals and working with them. You could also be a more physical damage ranger, like melee attacks. There's options for focusing on that. So rangers are kind of like a mixture of physical damage and then a little bit of magic on top of that, or having beast companions that fight with you. Very fun class. Rogue is, as you would expect, it's the stealthy class that sneaks around, gets surprise damage, is very good at opening locks and things and being sneaky and deceptive. So rogues have their own ways of going about things. In D&D, it's considered one of the weaker classes in certain phases of the game, but again, I would say don't worry about people min-maxing Dungeons & Dragons too much, especially if you're playing tabletop. it's more fun to focus on your own imagination, and all of these classes can be played well, where you're doing the best plays available for your character and able to advance in the story. So Rogue is very cool. Sorcerer, this is one of the main caster damage classes. They can have some ally buff spells, but sorcerers generally don't heal you, and they're very squishy. So they normally want to be in the back line, and they don't want to be beaten up by barbarians and fighters and stuff. They want to keep their distance and have high ground and control fights with area of effect damage and targeted spells. Sorcerers, they have their subclasses here. Wild magic. So this kind of varies up what benefits you get in your wild magic surge. A lot of randomness with this. Draconic bloodline. This is where you get to choose what dragon lineage you're from, because a dragon grants you the magical power that you have. Magic is difficult to do in the world. It's not something that everyone does. This is kind of a lore thing for D&D as a whole. Magical affinity can occur in a person where they're more apt to have magic. They can also have just a gift of very easy to use magic, in the case of your descendant from a dragon who's very powerful. You can think about why this is the case. How many generations ago, like, you had your dragon ancestor and so on. But you get to choose these, and I would reference before the dragonborn section, where you can look at which dragons are good and which are evil, but the general rule is colors are evil and metals are good. So that's sorcerer. We got draconic, and then storm sorcerer. So this is like thunder and lightning stuff. You can fly around at the end of your turn after casting a spell. So this is a very mobile type of caster. You're basically casting magic spell, fly away, casting magic spell, fly away. Makes you very difficult to catch. What else do we have? Warlock. So this class gets their power from a patron who is very powerful. It could be a fae. Here's the options here. You've pledged your soul to the hells or abyss in return for a deadly arsenal of fiendish arcana. So, yep, someone from the hells. Great Old One. You pledged something unthinkable to an unspeakably ancient entity, which in return furnished you with powers of cerebral entropy and control. So, some old thing that is very mysterious and powerful, that's giving you some powers. And the Archfey, graced by a lady or lord of the Fey, you are imbued with all the sumptuous and scary qualities of your patron's extraordinary realm. So the Fey realm is like fairies and elves. Elves are part Fey, but they granted you some power. That's how you're able to cast magic and spells. Warlock is kind of like Sorcerer in that it's usually a backline caster class. Their main stat is Charisma, so they're actually very good at talking to people. As a quick note, the Charisma classes, where that's their primary stat, are Warlock, Paladin, and Bard. So these ones work really well as what they call a party face. When you're going through social situations, talking to people will yield different outcomes when you're trying to negotiate with them and haggle them and get information out of them, depending on what your charisma is. How nice are you to talk to? How trustworthy are you? Because if you're high charisma, you can schmooze with people and get a lot out of them because they feel like they can trust you and they like talking to you. So Bard, Paladin, and Warlock have a leg up on the other classes because they usually have more charisma. So having at least one of these in a party is generally a pretty good idea if you can manage to do so. Looking at the other main stats, Ranger is a wisdom class for casting their spells, but dexterity is their primary ability. So more of like the thief archetype. Dexterity class, Ranger. Rogue is a dexterity class. Druid is a wisdom class. They're very wise in the ways of the land. They're going to be good at resisting psychic stuff for that reason. If anyone's trying to manipulate a druid's mind, it's probably not going to work as well as it would on other classes. Clerics are also a very wise class. They're committed to their deity, so they're not going to be mentally swayed as well. And that also makes them better able to sway others mentally with those kind of magical spells. Barbarian is a strength class, so punching stuff, pretty obvious. Fighter is also a strength class. smacking stuff around. Monk is a dex class like the ranger and the rogue. Dex is my favorite type of class to play as my characters. I do have a barbarian who's a strength class, but in BG3 I definitely like dex classes a lot. Sorcerer we said was, oh, I didn't mention this one. Sorcerer is also charisma as their main stat. Charisma, Paladin's charisma, and Bard is charisma. So there are 4 of these main classes that are charisma main stat. So Sorcerer is also a good party face to talk to people and haggle for good prices. And then the last class we have here that is the only of its kind in terms of primary stat is Intelligence, the Wizard. Wizards know a lot of shit. The way that they use magic isn't from having a draconic ancestor who granted them power, and it's not from a patron who you pledge to that's giving you dark powers. Wizards do the really, really hard work of just learning the written spells and writing them out and reciting the incantations. It is book learning, and it is memorization, and it is also having key pieces of paper on you that day of what you're ready to cast and what you have prepared to cast. So a lot more of a book-oriented magic user than either having an innate connection to magic somehow as a sorcerer would, or from a warlock, their patron, or from a paladin, their oath, or from a cleric, their deity, or from their druid nature. Wizards just write shit down. You get to choose which type of wizard you are. I believe that's level 3. But they're an intelligence class, so that's a relatively rare stat to have as your primary compared to the other classes. And as we're here and we've looked over all the classes, we can just take a look at the cantrip choices that you have. Cantrip is basically a weak spammable spell that you never run out of. You can use cantrips as many times as you want, but they're generally speaking not as strong as spells. You get to choose some of these depending on your class. Wizards get to do 3 at the start. Let's see what sorcerers get. They get 4 cantrips at the start. Warlocks get 2 cantrips at the start, but one of them is Eldritch Blast, which is a especially strong one that scales up in damage really well. Rangers get 1. Paladins get a couple specific paladin abilities they can use every day. They're called Channel Oath charges and Lay on Hands charges. Monks, they have their key that I mentioned before. Fighters do not get cantrips. Druids get 2 cantrips. Clerics get 3. Bards get 2. And barbarians just get very mad and rage. So yeah, the cantrips that you get, you gain some over time based on different reasons, but you can kind of go through what all these different cantrips do. Not every class has access to the same ones. So notice here we've got Sacred Flame, which is radiant damage, Produce Flame, Light, Resistance, and Guidance. These are the cleric options for cantrips. And then Sorcerer, we have different ones here. We don't have the Sacred Flame. We have Ray of Frost, Minor Illusion, Shocking Grasp, Mage Hand. We're not going to go over every spell in the game here. I just kind of want to illustrate that for the cantrip choice, when you're making your character, you'll have different options depending on what your class is. And you've also got spell slots. You can get 2 spells here as a sorcerer at the beginning, and it gives you some options. You could look these up in the D&D manuals as well. It doesn't need to be the Baldur's Gate menu for your spells. And you can also talk with your DM if you really want to research the spells in D&D or rename stuff and reskin things. You can do so. I did a key reskin of my game in D&D and my character as Call the Kenku Barbarian. He is a barbarian, but instead of being a Path of the Beast barbarian, where I have some like wolf power or some like bear barbarian power, I wanted to have a kind of reskinned demon soul power, where my character Call, he drank a potion that had a demon soul in it, which caused him to basically have this barbarian rage that grants him all the same benefits. It's completely just barbarian stats for everything, but it's reskinned and called something else. That's the idea, where you don't necessarily need to go with all the listed scripted stuff. You can say, okay, well, I like some elements of this, but can we just call it something else? That's generally fine, as long as you're not changing the stats and making yourself too overpowered. So certain classes, they don't get spells, but you could reskin stuff and negotiate with your dungeon master. Fighters get to choose a fighting style. This just gives them a bonus on that type of fighting for the rest of the game. And then, yeah, monks don't really choose anything in terms of spells at the beginning. Paladins choose their oath. And then this other last thing here that we haven't touched on, but is very important for your character, is your background. What has your job been? How have you gotten to where you are today? What are you doing? Where did you come from? Acolytes spent their life in service to a temple, learning sacred rites and providing sacrifices to the gods or gods you worship. Serving the gods and discovering their sacred works will guide you to your greatness. So, very religious oriented. Charlatan, you're basically a scam artist. For each of these, you get some skill proficiencies. So there is a key direct mechanical benefit to each of these options. Acolytes get insight and religion skills. Charlatans get deception and sleight of hand. Criminals get deception and stealth. Entertainers get acrobatics and performance. Folk heroes get animal handling and survival. Guild artisans get insight and persuasion. Nobles get history and persuasion. Outlanders get athletics and survival. Sages get arcana and history. Soldiers get athletics and intimidation. And urchins get sleight of hand and stealth. So you can think about it this way of what skills do I want to have, but you could also think about it story-wise, which is why would I have this as my job and how did this shape me? And you can focus more on just trying to play that character rather than choosing something that's optimal. You could be a noble paladin where you're just very lofty in society and you swore an oath to something. Or you could be a acolyte paladin, where you're a paladin who serves a particular church or something, or a religious group. You could be an entertainer bard, or you could be an entertainer sorcerer and be the kind of person who uses cantrips to put on a magic show and make people have a good time. You have a lot of different ways of combining your background and your class in a way that could make sense and be fun. I have a character that I had in a campaign with APOP. We haven't done this in a while, but one of his personas is Aston Balabrega, and he's a charlatan sorcerer, where he uses a lot of those magic spells and stuff to make a living just by entertaining people on the weekends. It's something that helps pay the bills, and he's not the strongest adventurer of all time, so it's not as though he is fighting cosmic level deities. He's trying to pay the bills, and you can pay the bills by entertaining people, and you could do so as a sorcerer or as a bard or something else. You could also be a folk hero, where you saved the city or some small town, so there are some people who revere you for that, and that's part of your origin story on what set you on the path of adventuring and trying to help people. You could be a guild artisan, where you have some skill set and you're trying to make your money that way. You could be an outlander, where you're kind of just out in the wilds and living off the land, and you don't really engage with society as much as other people. Of any of the classes, I feel like being an outlander of anything is pretty easy to imagine. Outlander wizard would be relatively harder, because wizards really like libraries and other places of established knowledge. Maybe you find an ancient library or something, but this, I think, is the only one that might struggle as an outlander. I would want the best books in town as a wizard. Sage, you're curious and well-read, with an unending thirst for knowledge. Learning about rare lore of the world would inspire you to put this knowledge to greater purpose. So this seems very, very good for wizards. That seems super appropriate. Soldier, you're trained in battlefield tactics and combat, having served in militia, mercenary company, or officer corps. Show smart tactics and bravery on the battlefield to enhance your prowess. And then urchin, after surviving a poor and bleak childhood, you know how to make the most out of very little. Using your street smarts bolsters your spirit for the journey ahead. So you came from the lowest rung of society. You didn't really have anyone backing you up, which is basically the opposite of noble. Cool. So these are the backgrounds. There are some other backgrounds that, like I said, you can basically homebrew in, where you talk to your dungeon master and you're like, hey, I know that these are the main listed ones, but can I be a pirate? They could say, yeah, sure, you can be a pirate, and we can say it's kind of a criminal type, but we will call your background pirate, and you can tell us what is the piracy that you've done, and that's part of your backstory. Next thing, these are the backgrounds. There's now abilities that you need to have. Normally when you do this for tabletop D&D, you are rolling dice for these, but the way that they do it in Baldur's Gate 3 is pretty good, I think, for learning just how many stats you have to work with. So they try to make it so that level 1 characters are stronger than the average human in certain ways, but maybe weaker than the average human in a couple ways. And you have to decide what are your primary stats and what do you want to boost the most when you're walking into the game. So 10 is meant to be the level of the average person. So if you're 10 strength, you're very average strength. And if you arm wrestle someone, it's kind of a 50-50. And then as you invest more points in strength, you would be able to outclass people in feats of strength, like trying to shove somebody or your melee attack damage. The more strength you have, the more you're going to be kicking ass at that. These ability points get more expensive as you get the stat higher. So normally at the start of the game, the highest you can get a stat is 17. That would be your main stat, and you can't get another stat to 17. And then you can have some secondary stats, and you would think about what those might be and why. A wizard probably doesn't have a high strength score because you're not hitting the gym and lifting weights and trying to win combat by the strength of your arms. You're trying to do so by your intelligence and the number of books that you've read and the number of good spells that you have in your kit. You might be pretty wise as a wizard. You might be maybe less charismatic because you don't like talking to people. You just want to read books and study spells. Or you could just say, no, I just want to be a high charisma character. And you could say that and just play out the game that way. But you also want to think about what are my vulnerabilities based on the stats that I'm bringing to the table. If, say, for example, we do this where we're working with a high intelligence and a high charisma, you're going to have low stats in something else. If you have low constitution, let's go over the stats first. Strength is muscles and physical power, affects your effectiveness with melee weapons, also determines how far you can jump and how much you can carry. Dexterity, agility, reflexes, and balance affects your effectiveness with ranged and finesse weapons, also affects your initiative and armor class. Initiative is just who acts first in battle. Armor class is people's chance to hit you. Constitution is stamina and physical endurance, affects your hit point maximum. So your ability to resist poisons and stuff as well. And also just your health, like how many hits it takes to kill you. Intelligence, memory, and mental power improves spellcasting for wizards. Wisdom, senses, and intuition improves spellcasting for clerics, druids, and rangers. Charisma, force of personality, improves spellcasting for bards, paladins, sorcerers, and warlocks, influences traders' prices. So what kind of character would you want to be? And then what would you know that you're vulnerable to? And what are you really good at? If you have a low wisdom and people try to use psychic magic on you, it's probably going to work. If you have high wisdom, you have a higher chance to resist it. If your dexterity is higher, you're usually faster to act in combat. So we have higher dex. That means that as soon as shit hits the fan and people start fighting, you know, and you're ready to jump at that or dodge an attack. Strength would be just your ability to push people around and shove. It's also your chance to break down doors or walls. So strength has a little bit of overlap with the role of the thief in that you can break your way through situations rather than lockpick your way through situations. Wisdom, we mentioned psychic stuff, and then charisma is definitely the conversation stat. that has the greatest bearing on dealing with people and navigating social situations. It's very good to have at least one charisma character in the party, but you could always roleplay, like, what if we were all just a bunch of stuffy cultists and we didn't really like talking to people, and maybe things were awkward some of the time. You can absolutely roleplay that, and you don't need to necessarily min-max, like I said. You can do stuff that sounds funny and fun that isn't necessarily game theory optimal. But you can talk to your DM about how they want you to use your starting stats. There are lots of different methods for how they'll tell you to do the rolls. And if you get unlucky, sometimes they'll let you just re-roll your stats depending on your dungeon master, just so everyone feels good about their character being at a fair starting point, not too overpowered, not too underpowered. And then one last note, kind of looking at being ready for combat as a caster. Certain classes have prepared spells, which they can adjust anytime they're out of combat. This is kind of like, what spells of everything that you know do you have right next to you that you can quickly pull out and cast in this combat when shit hits the fan? You can't carry fucking every textbook that you have on your shoulders as you're running around and use any wizard spell that's ever been written. That's untenable for a wizard. They need to have some quick stuff they can draw on that's prepared and ready to go, and you can change that at any time. So these are the spells that we would know at level 1 based on all of this stuff that's set. And for this round of combat, if shit hits the fan, we could have mage armor to make ourselves tanky and magic missile to shoot people. Or we could maybe say, I already cast mage armor on myself and it lasts all day. So after I cast that, I say, okay, now I can put that in my backpack and not have it prepared. And I'm going to pull out Thunder Wave so I can blast people in front of me with thunder because we're about to go in and take a fight. So preparing spells is another thing that you want to keep in mind if you pick any of the classes that can do so. The classes that can prepare spells are wizards. Do druids? Yes, druids prepare spells. Clerics prepare spells. And I believe paladins do. Let's check this. Paladins do not prepare spells. Cool. Sorcerers also do not prepare spells. They always have the same stuff. Warlocks do not prepare spells. They always have the same stuff. Cool. And then there's a whole bunch of mechanics of how the game works, but I wanted to have a pretty thorough breakdown here in making a character, and then just to go top to bottom of everything that you need to the point that you could be done, and then double check with your dungeon master. You need your race, you need your subrace, you need your class, you need whatever cantrips you have or abilities that you can cast on a regular basis, and you know how often you can cast those. Your subclass, you might choose it at level 1, you might unlock your subclass at level 3. You can do some research on that. Wizard, for example, gets their subclass at level 3. Monk as well gets it at level 3. Some classes I think might get it at level 2. So just double check with that. You might need a deity if you're a cleric. You need to choose your background of how you got to where you are and what skills you have as a result of that. You want to have your abilities, and then either roll for those or just kind of write out a set of these that is balanced, where you have the same amount of starting points that everyone else does in your party, and then double check that with your DM. And then if you're a class that needs to prepare spells, know what spells you have right out and available to use. But I hope you found this breakdown useful. If I left anything out and you think something else is very important to note when it comes to making a D&D character, feel free to let me know. There are different bits of information that you can read in terms... Oh, we missed something entirely. Skill proficiencies. Oh my gosh. Caught it. Abilities. So I looked at all the stats here, but we didn't go over skill proficiencies. We looked at some of them that you get as these backgrounds, so athletics, intimidation from being a soldier. But in this, skill proficiencies, you get to choose, depending on your class, a certain number of skills that you have. So we can hit change here, and we have 2 points available, and a fighter can choose some of these ones, and we get to boost our stats, basically. So our persuasion is a 2, But we could say, no, we actually are pretty charismatic, and maybe we have had to be a talker in the past and smooth things over with people, so maybe we have a +4 to persuasion. And then maybe we've learned some first aid and stuff in battle, and we're pretty good at administering first aid to people, so our medicine could be +2. Or we're good at sussing out bullshit, and our insight is better. You get to choose some skill proficiencies based on what class you are. I think Bard... Yeah, Bard gets more. They have 6, and they can choose from basically anything. So there are limitations on what classes have access to leveling up what skills. So yeah, you're gonna have to figure out your skill proficiencies as well. Athletics, acrobatics, keep your balance, resist being shoved, sleight of hand, this is picking locks and disarming traps. Stealth is sneaking around, not getting caught. Arcana is understanding mysterious magic, enchanted things, magical booby traps. History, remembering the past, the world and its people. Investigation, analyze clues and solve mysteries. Nature is recognize plants and animals, hug trees. Religion, recognize deities, understand holy rites. Animal handling is influence animals, pet all of the dogs. Insight, read people and situations, detect lies. Medicine, recognize symptoms, diagnose disease. Perception, observe your environment, spot hidden details. Survival is stay alive in the wilds, track prey. Deception is lie and cheat, manipulate the truth. Intimidation, be a bully, threaten and induce fear. Performance, entertain audiences, command the stage. Persuasion, turn on the charm, coax and cajole. So these are your proficiencies, the things that you can be skilled in. And depending on your class, you can choose different ones. Let's look at Warlock. They get 5 of them. How many does a Rogue get? Ooh, Rogue gets... They get quite a good set of them. So Rogues are pretty handy when it comes to navigating situations, especially Sleight of Hand +7 and Stealth +7. So yeah, out of combat, Rogues have a lot of tools that maybe people have said Rogue isn't the strongest direct damage class in combat at max levels and so on, but Rogues can absolutely get through doors. There are so many situations in D&D where the DM either gives you a puzzle and a door, and Rogues are very good at dealing with doors and things that are locked. But these are the races, the classes, the backgrounds, the abilities, and the skills of Dungeons & Dragons with the added assistance of the Baldur's Gate menu. I highly recommend the D&D Player's Handbook if you like collecting books and reading stuff. The lore in BG3 is the same official D&D lore, so you can also read stuff in these menus. And then also be able to maybe research what are the different types of races or the different types of classes that exist in D&D, and can I ask my DM if it's okay to mix in something like that. This has been Making a D&D Character with me, Neuro. I hope you found this breakdown useful. If you have any personal insights on what you think is important for making a character, feel free to give a YouTube comment. Thank you for watching. Good luck.